Iran and the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council plus Germany hold talks over Tehran's nuclear energy program. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif sat down with his counterparts on the sidelines of the annual UN General Assembly in New York. The talks mark the highest-level meeting between U.S. and Iranian officials in decades. After the meeting, EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton called the talks positive and said the group heard Zarif's suggestions on how to move forward. Ashton says the nuclear talks will continue in Geneva on October the 15th and 16th, and the parties will focus on practical details. The UK's Foreign Secretary William Hague has also said the tone and spirit of the talks with Iran were extremely good. The US Secretary of State John Kerry and Iran's Zarif also commented on the talks after the meeting.
We had a very constructive initial meeting of EU 3+3 or 5+1 or whatever you want to call it. Discussions were very substantive, businesslike. We hope to be able to make progress towards resolving this issue in a timely fashion based on respecting the rights of the Iranian people to nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, including enrichment, and at the same time making sure that there is no concern at the international level that Iran's nuclear program is anything but peaceful. We also had a short bilateral discussion with Secretary Kerry after the meeting, in which we stressed on the need to continue these discussions, to give it the political impetus that it requires, and hopefully to reach a conclusion within a reasonable time. I'm satisfied with this first step. Now we have to see whether we can match our positive words with serious deeds so that we can move forward.
I think you've heard from some of the other ministers. We had a constructive meeting, and I think all of us were pleased that Foreign Minister Zarif came and made a presentation to us which was very different in tone and very different in the vision that he held out with respect to the possibilities of the future. I have just met with him now on a side meeting, which we took a moment to explore a little further the possibilities of how to proceed based on what President Obama laid out in his speech to the General Assembly.
Well, to discuss that a bit further, we're now joined by Mr. Danny Schechter, who is the editor of MediaChannel.org, and he's joining us live now from New York. Mr. Schechter, thanks a lot for joining us. Now, you know, a lot of optimism, a lot of feel-good words coming out of that meeting. How do you assess it?
Well, if this was a tennis match, I think you'd have to give the first set to Iran. Iran, you know, has surprised and put the rest of the world off guard, so to speak, because they were expecting perhaps a more hostile and vituperative approach, and instead Iran was not only very sophisticated, but it was also very, as they say, constructive in establishing some parameters for continued discussion. Obviously, the problems have not been solved, but they haven't been derailed either, and that's very significant because there are forces at the UN and in the United States that don't want any talks at all. And the fact that this went as smoothly as it did, that other countries, especially the European countries, are positive about the process, gives us some encouragement that this could actually move forward into a real agreement. Also, Iran's insistence on doing it quickly, in a way, mirrors what the United States was saying about Syria, so no one could object to that. And the fact that the train is on the track and is moving forward is a very good sign and a real achievement so far at these United Nations talks.
But do you think, Mr. Schechter, that domestic policies in the United States will allow for the president to be able to go through with any agreement in the future with Iran?
Well, you know, a lot of it is uncertain. Obviously, there's a rebellion underway against the president right now by the Tea Party people. There are a lot of other issues, including a possible shutdown of the United States government. The whole future of the healthcare system, you know, is being disputed and debated. You know, so obviously this is not the only issue on the agenda for Mr. Obama. He's dealing also with his policies towards Syria. But even so, it's hard to argue with success. It's hard to argue with a spirit that's, quote, constructive. And I think that this makes it much harder for the forces that want to derail this, who are sniping at President Rouhani, who are suggesting that he's a secret anti-Semite or anything else, for that to gain much traction. They've tried to, you know, discredit him, and it hasn't really worked yet. So we'll see what happens. Certainly, the Israeli lobby in America has announced plans to go after Iran again to try to stop this. But I think there's a desire on the part of a lot of the parties and the people of the world to see this conflict, if not ended, certainly, you know, adjudicated in some sort of fair way. And the fact that that process has begun is quite amazing. I don't think anybody a week ago would have believed that it was even possible.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for now, but of course we do appreciate your insight. That was Schechter speaking to us live from New York.